All right, this is our last night here with the story of us. This has been a lot of fun. Every time I do this, it's just good for me to be reminded of the story too. And I love when I can tell others the story. And so I want to remind you, we started around 2000 BC. And we're coming all the way to 2021 AD. So 4,000 years of history. We look at the story of God's people, beginning all the way back with Abram, this guy who was just a Chaldean, nothing special as far as we know, a person among hundreds of thousands, if not perhaps millions in that early world. And he receives this call to go to this new land because God wants to do something in his life. And he goes. And so the first mark of the people who follow God is this trust and this faithfulness to just get up and take the step. And he gets up, takes his wife, takes his nephew and his wife. They move to this new world, this new land, this place that's the promised land, this land of Canaan. And there he begins this journey of faith. And God promises him, you're going to have descendants like the sand of the sea, like the stars of the sky. I'm going to give you a son. Abraham is like, wait a minute, I'm already in my 80s. This is crazy. And he ends up having a son when he's almost 100 years old. And even his wife is all the way. So Abraham has Isaac. Abraham, is that right? Yeah, Abraham, Isaac has Jacob. And so the name there didn't sound right first. Isaac and Jacob. And we see that Jacob has these 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. And this whole story begins. So they go into captivity in Egypt. Then they're brought out. 400 years later, God brings out the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and brings them back to the promised land. And we know the miracles of crossing the wilderness, the fire by night, the pillar of cloud by day, bringing them through the Red Sea and carrying them through this land of nothing and providing food, bringing them back to the promised land and the formation of the kingdom of Israel with, first of all, King Saul, then after that, David and Solomon, and then there's a division, and we think, there's this, one of the constant themes that we were seeing is that God uses these broken people, these people that are sometimes faithful and sometimes faithless, but God doesn't abandon them. God is the one who's always faithful. And God works through these sometimes faithful, sometimes unfaithful people, and just carries the story forward through centuries and centuries and centuries. All of it starting really even before Abraham. We go all the way back to the garden when humanity falls, they become broken creatures because they have disobeyed, they have not trusted God, and so the relationship with God is broken, and God says, I'm going to repair it. And so Abraham is the first huge step in that reparation. And it brings us all the way up to the person of Jesus, who just, the world, it shifts there. There's something that just completely shifts in the history of humanity. Because here is Jesus, who's preaching this message of God's love and grace and forgiveness and reconciliation. After the people of Israel have been trying to follow the law, and Jesus says that it's more than following the letter of the law. It's about your heart. And is your heart right with God? He calls these disciples. The disciples follow Jesus around for about 3 years, and then Jesus is crucified, and they think it's all over, and then there's a resurrection, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, and Jesus goes back to God, and the disciples go out through all the world, and the church is planted. And we see the story of the church. Again, the people of God. And again, the people who are constantly doing amazing things and falling on their faces and getting back up. And there's brokenness and there's division. And God works through all of this crazy stuff, forming and transforming and changing the world. Where would the world be today if there had been no church? What would the world look like today if there had not been messages of hope and grace? I don't know. I don't know what it would look like. There's been this transformation in so many parts of the world because of the gospel of Jesus. While we all know that the spread of Christianity has not always been a positive thing. People have done bad things in the name of the faith. And we hear about that a lot in the news, but there have always been so many good things that have happened because of the faith. I mean, how many countries around the world where missionaries showed up and they brought with them medicine and education, things that were not there. And lives were saved and people's lives were changed because they learned to read and write. I believe I mentioned James Michener in his novel Texas. He writes these huge novels, and in that novel he mentions you knew the Methodist had been in town if there was a church and a school and a hospital. I mean, hospital in that day was just a little medical clinic, but those things were things that the church brought and that changed lives. And so we find that as part of the story of Christianity as they spread the gospel, education spread. And so we follow the story through the formation of the church. Rome, the Western church breaks away from the Eastern church, and that's our part of the story is the Western church. And then there's this big backlash in the early 1500s to correct things that were seen as incorrect within the church. So there's this Reformation. The Bible is printed for the first time. The printing press comes out and people are able to read the scriptures and they're like, oh, this is the message. This is what we haven't been hearing. And so there's this whole movement of a reaction against the Western church, the Roman Catholic Church. And one of those reactions was on that in the country of England, the Kingdom of England, Great Britain. There's this man, John Wesley, whose heart is strangely warmed. And he understands that grace is an important part of the story. And he begins to speak and preach about grace. After he's learned the hard way, after he's traveled to the U.S. as a missionary, and he sees people living faithful lives while he hasn't, he's transformed. And this new movement to reinvigorate, put new life into the Anglican Church. But it comes to America and does something different. America breaks away, and then these crazy Americans are like, well, they need their own church. And so the Christmas Conference in 1789 establishes the Methodist Episcopal Church. And we follow the story of Methodism, and it just spreads across America with everything else that's spreading. As the railways move west, and as the roads move west, and the settlers move west, those Methodists come along as well. And they come all the way to Texas. And in Texas, we find the founding of the Methodist Church here in the 1800s. And there's the Mexican-American War in the 1840s. And in that war, the boundary lines between Mexico and the United States are pushed from the Nueces River down south to the Rio Grande, or the Rio Bravo. Which side you're on and what you want to call it. It's the Rio Bravo, it's the Rio Grande. And when that new land is taken and made a part of America, of course, pioneers pile in and they move down here next to the river. And my understanding, the river was once used, boats went up and down this river, there was transportation all the time. And you may have noticed that there's little towns all the way along the river. And my understanding is that, I can't remember if it's every 10 miles or if it was every 6 miles. There was a railroad track that ran the length of the river, and every either 6 or 10 miles, there was a stop so that the train could stop and let the U.S. cavalry and their horses off if they needed to protect the border. And so that's why you have all these little towns like Westlaco and Donna and Alamo Far, all these towns so close together is that they're all train stops for military outposts all the way up. Yeah. So then, and some of them grew into towns and some of them disappeared over time, but you have all these little stops all along. And so in the 1800s, that was happening. It was in 1849 that the first Methodist minister was assigned to the Brownsville circuit. And that minister was responsible for attending all of the communities from Brownsville all the way to Roma. Okay, so just about what Rome is going to be to Brownsville is probably looking at about, well, that's 100 miles or more. And so the minister would take, a week or two and go and preach and make his way back on horseback or on a train or however else he was able to do that. There was a Methodist minister, and Methodists were meeting right here in McAllen in 1909. 3 years before this was even a city, it was just an area within Hidalgo County. And they were, in fact, up until that time, most Christians gathered in a lumber yard. They didn't separate by denominations. They get together in a lumber yard and they'd sing, and whatever preacher was in town, whether it was the Presbyterian or the Baptist or the Methodist, whoever was there would preach. And that's the way it happened. And then in 1909, there was a Methodist minister, Reverend C.W. Godwin, who oversaw the organization of the Methodist Church with 30 members. And within the first week, they started building their first meeting house. So that's how things started, right here in McAllen. And over the next decades, that church evolved into what became known as the McAllen First United Methodist Church. So the first meeting place was built in 1909. They built another place in 1913. By 1915, there's over 100 members. There's 8 Sunday school classes. And, you know, this was all happening in this border town, which was at this time, you know, almost 100% agricultural. It was became a city of citrus and, you know, vegetables and everything else that they could irrigate from the river. And so largely an agricultural world down here. In 1929, they got land on Main Street. They built a sanctuary, but it wasn't the sanctuary that's there now. That one was built in 1947, and the idea was to have a place that would seat 1,200 people. Oh, this was a big place. And so, have any of you ever been in that church?
It's on Main Street.
It's on Main Street, yeah. And now it's a Montessori school.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Montessori school now on Main Street, and I went in there, gosh, back in the 1990s, when the first time I came to the Valley, and it is huge, and it's sort of very traditional structure. It's got a big balcony as well, and so it's 2 levels, and it's at a lot of people. It was.
What cross street is it? So I think more of 83.
It is north of Business 83. Yeah.
Okay.
Just a little bit north, maybe a couple of blocks north of 83, 2 or 3 blocks. Yeah, not far from Archer's Park.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's around that. Yeah, it's as I recall, it's right around that area. Yeah. So that was built in 1947. At that time, they had over 650 in Sunday school, 7 adult Sunday school classes. And then if you look at the timeline, there's a big hole from 47 to 95. And that's because there was so much happening in those, 50 years. It was sort of a time when the church was just exploding. They were building education buildings. They were new classes were forming. There was Methodist women's missionary groups, mission societies. These were all growing. I mean, everything that could grow was growing at this time. The city was growing. The city was also transitioning slowly from agriculture to back, into what it's becoming now, of service industries all around us. But I should have brought the book, and I may go grab it when we're finished. But there's actually a book on the first 100 years of the church, filled with pictures. And what we see is just grow, 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 to the point that they outgrew the buildings. And there was nowhere else to build because it was on Main Street, and everything around it was developed.
Mm-hmm.
They had managed to buy something across the street and tear it down and put in a parking lot. But they could, if they were to use that for building space, they would lose the parking. They just had nowhere else to go. And so in 1995, the church began talking about relocating. Now, that is no small thing. Y'all are aware of that, right? I mean, when you move yourself as a family, that's a huge thing. When you move all the families, and this is a building that was precious to so many things that happened there. I'm sure that at that time, everybody who was there who had been married in the church had been married in that church. And their children had been baptized in that sanctuary. And the kids had grown up in the Sunday school in those education buildings. And so for the church to get to the point where they realized, hey, we've got to move. That these folks had to put prayer, they had to put so much thought, consideration into this. but they were looking to keep doing what they'd done. We need, in order to keep being the church they've been, a church that was in mission, a church that was growing, a church that was touching the community. They knew they had to step out of what was comfortable and known and loved and go to a new place, way outside the city, way out in the middle of nowhere, up on North McCall Road. And I promise you, in 1995, there was nothing out here. It was orchards. I remember when we first came to the valley the first time in 1997, and we would go from McAllen, we lived in McAllen, and we would drive to Edinburgh. It seemed like so far, and we would leave homes and buildings and just drive what seemed like forever, just through all these orange orchards and nothing until we finally got to Edinburgh. And now, of course, you don't even know where one ends and the other begins. So this was in the middle of nowhere, but they knew that things seemed to be growing this way. And this was going to provide opportunity for growth, for continued ministry. Before they moved out here in 1997, they had their first contemporary service at that downtown church. And that one, I'm sure, was like, oh, what is all this crazy stuff with this contemporary music and different stuff? But, you know, they were breaking barriers because that's what these folks were. These were folks that came from that pioneer stock that was, you know, had come in 80 years before and they were setting up shop and they were planting families and their lives. So this is probably the third generation of those folks that are now deciding to move out here, who are having contemporary services. They'd gotten the land, and in 2002, they had the property consecrated. The bishop's name just left me. I know him. I can see his face. It'll come to me about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Robert,
Now, Schnese was the pastor at the time, but he wasn't bishop at the time.
okay.
Was it Bishop Gonzalez? That name seems to be right. I can see him. He's a little, well, everybody's short compared to me. But whenever I think of him, I've seen him, I've met him. But he was here for the consecration of the property. And the first service was held in the newly constructed Fellowship Center.
Well,
That's the gym.
That makes me feel so good. I was here in 2003.
Really?
One service,
Wow.
and I knew I entered from the north.
How about that?
And I keep looking at the sanctuary thinking,
That's
is there a
good.
door?
How did you forget that? So what they did is they built that first, the Fellowship Center, with the promise of building this. And the plan was to start building this, if I recall, around 2007 or 8, right when the economic crisis hit. That was right in 2008, I believe. Everything went blah.
Yeah.
And so everything was ready to go to start this, and then it was suddenly they couldn't do it because the money that had been promised, then of course people had lost money, so many people lost so much money, it all ground to a halt.
Yeah.
And so what was going to be a temporary for a few years became long-term.
Yeah.
2002 until 2018, so for 16 years, that was everything. But of course, back in around 2016, they realized, hey, we can do this, we can start doing this. I remember when they broke ground, I remember driving by and seeing, first of all, just the metal, and there was a green cross up on top. And they were getting ready to build this new sanctuary. And on Palm Sunday, 2018, they had their first service right here. And Bishop Stacey was here for that, for the consecration of the new building. And so jump forward just 3 years to 2021, we have about 750 members that are a part of the congregation here. 750 to 800 members, a part of the congregation here. There was an average attendance of about 350 pre-COVID, if I recall correctly. I wasn't here. Those who were, you were here, Allegra? Does that sound about right? Yeah, okay. That's sort of what I heard. This year, we've had our high average has been around 200. Now, after Delta, it dropped off again. This last Sunday, we had 250 in worship, and it was fantastic, you know? So here's hoping. We have 2 worship services, a contemporary and traditional. We've got Sunday school opportunities. We have children's activities. Linda can tell us more about that, right? 20 something today, 21? Yeah, fantastic. The community ministry, we've got food pantry, colonias, it's not all on here. School partnerships. We have built ramps. We've had the service project, mission service project most summers until COVID hit, which brought in, I don't know how many youth that were repairing homes and houses. We also have dreams for more ministry. We're already talking about a Christmas in the park service this year. Going to the park, no electronics, just singing carols, telling some stories. So we're going to see what happens with that. Susan Helms and I have talked about an international mission project. We want to start doing one every other year. That's a doable goal, that we would go and hopefully set up a partnership somewhere and just go every other year and work in a different country. Not a different country at a time. Set up a 3 or 4, 5, 6 year partnership, and so for 3 years, 3 of those 6 years, we would go and work with, invest time and energy. So we're dreaming about these things. We got things on the horizon. Our day school's got over 80 children in it right now. We're hoping to have 100 come next year, as as COVID goes down, as children get inoculated. We hope those numbers come up, because we have people that were in church this Sunday too who are part of the day school. We've got 2 families in the last month and a half that have started attending because of their connection to the day school. And that's great. That's wonderful when those things happen. The day school starts, I believe, at 18 months and goes up to kinder. We have a kindergarten class this year for the first time in a long time. Maybe they had one before. I'm not even sure we had one before. Yeah, COVID has just slowed down how much we're learning and how fast we're learning it. It's still trying to get the history and all the stuff that's happened. We're on social media like we've never been on social media before. COVID has pushed us out there in such a way to keep us all connected. So we've got our website and Facebook and a YouTube channel and Instagram, and probably other stuff that Veronica has us on I don't even know about. But are we on Twitter? Wow. Okay, I'm not a Twitter person, so I didn't know that. Okay, Twitter. And so we're all over social media, into the community, into the world. And what we have found is that we have become connected to people far beyond the McAllen community. Throughout the valley, we've got folks in San Antonio, Austin. There's a family in Japan that watches us online. There are people all over the place. And our Winter Texans, as they all went home this last year, they stayed connected with us online. Something that never happened before. Yeah. They would go home and that would be it, and then they'd come back and reconnect. And now it's just this sort of seamless connection that's happening. And we have folks that are a part of the church, that have joined the church, who've never stepped foot within the walls. That's the world of code for us. And that's, for a lot of us, that's just like this. That doesn't seem like, but it is. That's what's happening. So the mission of United Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So as the people of God, how are we going to do this in the days to come? Are there things we need to do differently, better? And what's the story that's going to be told of us 100 years from now? So what I hope you get from all of this is that this is a story, and we're still writing the story. And I just wonder, what are your thoughts on where the story needs to go? I've done a lot of talking. I'm going to let y'all talk some. Where does the story need to go? What are they going to say about us 100 years from now? They look back to the church back in 2021. What's the story?
I want people to think of our church in connection with community.
Okay.
When they think about, like they've heard of our church because they have maybe not necessarily been here, but they've like seen us out and about doing things. We already do like if they know that we have a food pantry, or they know that like our church, is involved with the refugees or things like that. I really like for that to be kind of like how our church is.
Oh, you're the church that does.
Yeah.
Oh, y'all are from that church that. So yeah, let's make that known. So part of
Then
our.
it's easy to be like, yeah, you came to our trunk or treat, you want to go to service something,
Yeah.
or like the days of glory, right?
Yeah, great.
I've said that always that the young families are the growth of the church. And the more we reach those young adults and young early families is a big deal.
So the story needs to include an intentional outreach to young families
Right.
and making sure that young families that walk in find what they're hoping for and that they feel that welcome.
And the
All right.
fact that you have care for little ones as
Yeah.
small as they are, and they know that the nursery will lay up.
Yeah.
And like the families that come to WOW aren't necessarily families from our church.
Isn't that interesting?
And so I said to Leanne, let's get those parents in, show what our program is like, and get the parents involved so they go, I want to go to that church. Look what my child is learning.
Yeah.
So I really think that's an area that we could hit and bring in more families.
That's true.
really.
I'll tell you, when our kids were little and we would go into a church, I'll tell you what formed our perception of the church more than anything was if the people loved and accepted our children.
Mhm.
You don't have to talk to me, but if you're great to my kids, you got me.
Mhm.
All right? And so I think there's a lot to be said about making sure that children
Mhm.
are accepted and loved, and that the parents are aware of that connection. And I think that definitely is going to be a piece. Yeah. Okay. So young families, and making sure that we make sure that they know that they're wanted, loved, and welcomed.
Yeah.
Right here.
Absolutely.
All right. Good thoughts. Good thoughts. Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to put it in words. So true to our faith
Yeah.
and scripture, regardless of what society is for Christians right now.
Yeah.
You just, I see stuff all the time. I'm
Yeah.
a Christian, but I don't think like that.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So true to.
Yeah. I worked a lot in higher education, in Christian higher education. And the schools in Christian higher education that were thriving were those that were very clear in who they were with regard to the faith. Even if some of them were very conservative or more progressive or liberal, but as long as they stayed true to who they were supposed to be, those schools tended to flourish. And most of them are private schools, and private schools just, they wrestle with stuff. The schools that tended to die were the schools that just sort of drifted into whatever they thought the culture wanted them to be.
Mhm.
And then they sort of stopped having a reason to exist. And so there would be this little bump as they sort of embraced things, and then as they lost their distinctiveness, they began to die. And I wonder if there isn't some truth about churches in the same way. The importance of knowing our story, who we are as Methodists, the message of grace, and just holding to that, and being distinctive. Yeah, this is who we are as Christians. Is that sort of what you're thinking? Yeah.
You're not wishy-washy, you know.
Yeah.
but, you know,
Just,
say churches or cults or whatever you got out there. It's
Yeah.
true to the scripture, it's true to.
true to who we say we are.
Mhm.
Yeah. Remembering where we have come from, I think is important in this area. That, there were a group of people that wanted to be faithful to Jesus. And they were this group called Methodist. And they came together and they pulled what meager funds they had and they built their first church building. If I recall correctly, their first church building cost a whopping $718. All right, huge.
Then it was, I said.
Then it was, and the next one was something like $3,000. So, just 4 or 5 years later, they built a new one for like $3,000, and
Whoa.
yes, and you know what? Even back then, when they built that first, the last big church on Main Street, it took them a long while to pay it off. It's taking us a while to pay this one off, but when they built this, my understanding is that they built this with the intention that this building would be used for our community. They built it in a way so that it could be used for musical programs, theatrical programs, that the community would have a building here.
And what impressed me was when you brought the border patrol here, to have that wonderful dedication,
Yeah,
or, the
yeah,
memorial service.
two of them. Yeah,
of
they
them?
lost 2 soldiers. Yeah, just, tragic accidents.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was the intention when they designed and built the sanctuary, was that it would be open for things like that.
That's great.
And so we're already looking at, Pastor Laura and I are talking with folks, how do we bring more people into this space and let them use it? So we're looking at this give and take of going in and out. We want those who are members of the congregation to go out into the community. And then we also want the community to feel free to come into this space and use it. One of the things that I've so long just bemoaned and fretted about is how many churches that exist that open their door on Sunday morning for an
I know,
hour and
yeah.
they close it and they turn off the lights.
And lock it.
Just sits there and nothing for 6 days. 6 days and 20 hours. Nothing happens in the space that is supposed to
It's
be
God.
a place where God
Well,
touches
and there-
lives.
And even in big cities, they used to be open so you could go in for prayer,
Yeah.
and now they're locked.
Well, people
Yeah, people
disrespecting
take
and
things.
vandalism,
Yeah,
what do? You find that balance.
What has the church done to open that door to look at it as a community usage? Word of
I
mouth?
don't know what it was before. Pre-COVID, I don't know. And so
Well, that's right.
when this COVID is over, Pastor Laura and I have already been talking about how do we connect with organizations.
Yeah.
There was a group that did like a Zumba class over.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, pre-COVID, so it was like just a fun little like exercise
Yeah.
Zumba class that somebody at the church taught, so that was like open to everybody, not just church members.
There is a class that goes on in our choir room. I think twice a week,
Twice
an
a week.
exercise class or something. What?
Yeah.
You've heard of it?
Well, yeah.
Okay, I don't
Is
know.
it affiliated with the church?
I haven't been invited to join it.
I think it's the church
Someone in the
people.
church is teaching it, but I
Yeah.
don't know if it's only church members who come. I don't know.
We gotta get that stuff on Instagram.
I know we need it. There's so much that we want to see happen. And so here's the beauty is we get to write the story of what happens as we go forward. And so all the things y'all mentioned are exactly what should be happening. We need to be going out to community.
Mhm.
Community needs to be free to come in.
That's wonderful.
We want to connect with groups within the community and say, hey, we have this space. Come and use it. The education building, also underused. We do have the
It
day
is
school.
amazing.
Yeah, we've got a space over there. We're inviting sports groups to come and use the
Oh, the
gym.
gym. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's always been the case.
Yeah.
In terms of, we
That
did
is-
a lot of places, like they love our gym.
They
And
do.
Very regular basketball, I remember basketball.
That's right.
Very excited.
Before the Delta variant, we had a coach that was bringing and training basketball players, I think 3 days a week.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
so we want that to start back again, and that's just again,
And
another
then
one of
we
those.
need to feel
The fields,
Mhm.
yes. And
something that takes money, but I know that just would be very helpful, and those fields would be super, super useful if they had lights. And I know that, that's easier to say, but like my brother-in-law is a soccer coach, and they're always looking for places to have the practices, but like during the
And
daylight hours.
Yeah.
Let's put those lights out there, you know, the big lights. And
Yeah.
So he's always looking for places with lights, and I told him, I was like, we can use these, and he's like, yes, we love them, except as soon as it gets dark, you know, then we're, off the.
That's
signal.
dreaming.
All right.
It's dreaming, right?
Spoiler, Susan Helms is already working with folks. If we're working with folks to put in a walking track around the outside
Oh, wow.
and lights on the fields.
Yeah, let's
So
do that.
we're dreaming,
Huge
we're
community
working,
growth.
and conversations already happening with McAllen, I believe it's McAllen Parks and Recreation and some other groups about finding funding, and so we want these things to happen. We want this campus to be something that exists for community and not just for McAllen FUMC members. This needs to be a place where people come in contact. And so in the evenings, Pastor Laura and I will sometimes go out and just walk and talk to the coaches and to the parents, just to say, thank you for using our fields. One, to let them know that we know they're there and it's our fields and we're happy that they're using it. Just so that connections are made.
Neat.
So we want to see this multiply so that 100 years from now, in 21, as somebody is leading classes, probably much better technology than what we have. Yeah, hologram, virtual reality, every chair filled with holograms, something. Then they're telling the story of this congregation. They'll say, hey, when COVID ended, there was this huge shift as McAllen First UNC moved outside the walls and pulled community inside the walls. And they were known because they did this, and this, and this, and they stayed true to the message of Methodism, to the doctrines of the church. So may that be our story. And we're the ones that have to make it happen. All of us people out there, all of us. It's not up to the pastors. It's up to everyone working together, keeping first things first, making sure that we keep our eyes exactly where the early Methodists kept their eyes. They were about fellowship and encouraging one another in faith. They're about reaching out to the least in the community and providing for those that did not have. And it was about living the faith, not about the things that tend to distract us, not about the things that don't matter. It's about lives. And so this is the story of us. That's what it was all the way back to Abraham. That was the message we hear through the Old Testament about, even in the book of the law, it was about caring for the stranger who was among you. Caring for the stranger, that person who wasn't a part of who you are. And when we get to the prophets, it was about being a light to the Gentiles, reaching beyond who you are and shining the light into the darkness of the world around you. And when it came to Jesus, John's gospel talks about the light shining in the darkness. The Word became flesh. And it's also in that first chapter of John where he says, grace upon grace has been poured out in the coming of Jesus. And so this is the refrain that we hear through Scripture of being a people that reach out and touch children and community. And we hold firmly to that message of grace. Well, this is the story of us. And I am so glad we got to do this for the last, 8 weeks. It seems like it was gone too
I know,
fast.
Yeah,
We'll
I'm glad
do,
we're meeting next week.
we'll have
Yeah.
our supper gathering next week.
I'm just-
And so I guess we should tell folks that are online, if they want to join us, call the church office. We'll put you in touch with where we're going to be next week. It's not going to be recorded. It's going to be just fun and around the table somewhere around here as we sit and talk, get to know each other, as we dream some more and tell our own stories for each other. And this will be, it's going to be great. It'll be good. What comments, what questions, what thoughts do y'all have as we bring this to a close? We're a little bit earlier finishing, but sometimes, that good book you're reading always ends too soon.
I really appreciate being a new member and learning the history, and I really feel like I've come home.
Yay!
I have come home. I wanted to say that on Sunday, and I sat down and I go, why didn't I say that? Why didn't I say
Well,
that?
everything you did say was so good. Thank
Oh.
you for sharing. That was beautiful.
Did you speak at the early service? I'm going back to YouTube, so I can.
You should
Oh,
go.
oh my gosh, that's
Yes.
awesome. Okay,
She spoke at the early service.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
can't wait. Okay.
Yep. Told her story at the early
Yeah,
service.
but I do. I just feel like God led me here. I just know He did, because I've gotten older and I think, can you use me anymore?
Ah.
And I think He said, yeah.
You come to the right place. You'll find that we tell no one no. If you have a desire to serve, we will find a place.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm gonna be signing up for your next offering, whenever it is.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see what that's gonna be in spring. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll write y'all and say, what were your thoughts about what it should be again? Tell me again. Any others? All right.
I
Well,
have one question.
Yeah.
When is your birthday? What day?
it was Monday.
It was Monday.
It was
Oh.
Monday. Done. We passed that one by. Missed that one. Boats ship sailed.
Did we not sing happy birthday to him in the service?
We did.
You did?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, okay.
I admitted it.
Oh, okay.
I admitted it. I admitted it.
Yeah. Cause Pastor Laura kept going.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was
Oh,
a good.
happy belated
it was-
birthday.
It was good. It was a good birthday. All right. Well, we'll close with a word of prayer, and we'll look forward to seeing next week, and then the next gathering in the spring, or whatever that ends up being. All right. Let's pray. God, we thank you for our time that we've had together these weeks, as we've gotten to know each other a little bit, and we've heard the story of your people a lot. May we continue to walk with you as you write the story. And may it be just another wonderful chapter, the story of your people, as we strive to serve you faithfully, as we strive to live out the call you've placed in our lives. Thank you, God, for being with us, for calling us to this, and for the future that you have for us. We lift our prayer in Jesus' name.